Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the new Dunu DK3001-BD, which is a terrible name, but the BD stands for Brain Dance, so we're just going to call this thing the Brain Dance. And what this is Dunu's newest IEM. It is a tribrid of sorts. It's got a single dynamic driver, it's got 4 balanced armatures, and it's got 4 of this kind of newfangled microplanar drivers. They kind of look like balanced armatures, I'll be honest. But it's coming in at $500, so it's not super cheap, but also not super expensive, given the last Dunu IEM I reviewed was, I guess, around $600, and the last one before that was around like 1,000, 1,200, 1,300, something like that. Anyway, the DK3001, this one was just announced at Shenzhen International Audio Show, which you might recall I was at back in September. And this was there, and I actually kind of ignored it. Like, I didn't really like the way that it looked, and I don't know, I wasn't that interested in listening to it, so I didn't listen to it there. But then it was there again at Can Jam a week later, where I was as well. And I decided, all right, I'm going to listen to this IEM. And I was immediately blown away, okay? I was really impressed with this IEM at Can Jam. In fact, in my Discord server, if you're not in the Discord server, by the way, link in the description down below. But on my Discord server, we had a room dedicated to Can Jam. And while I was listening to it, I was like, dude, this thing rocks. And that was my initial impression. And I was very excited to get this thing home and listen to it for a longer time and see if that initial "this thing rocks" impression would hold true. And so for the past week or so, I've had the BD, the Brain Dance, at home, been living with it, listening to it, and comparing it with some other IEMs in its price range, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. So before we get into a quick shout out to Dunu for sending this IEM for review, if you want to check it out, I've got them linked in the description down below. And anything else we need to talk about? I don't think so. So with that out of the way, let's dive to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box with the Brain Dance, the physical form factor, build quality, fit and comfort, all that good stuff. Then we'll get into talking about the sound. We'll talk about the sound signature, what it sounds like to my ear, and then we'll get into some direct comparison with a couple of other IEMs that I think you should probably be considering if you're thinking about spending around $500 on an IEM. And then we'll wrap this all up with a rating of sorts. So without further ado, this is what you get inside the box of the Brain Dance. And as is increasingly typical for Dunu, there's frankly like more than I can fit in the camera that comes inside the box. All right, this is all the stuff that comes inside the box. Where to start? Okay, here's the box itself. You know, like I mentioned, it's the Brain. It literally says Brain Dance on it. Okay, this is the Brain Dance IEM. But let's dive in. Let's talk about the ear tips first, because you know Dunu always includes a nice selection of ear tips, and I always say that this is a very important thing, because when you get a new IEM, I always recommend the first thing you do is just spend some time trying out different ear tips. And you might only get the 3 sets of ear tips that come in your typical IEM, but maybe you've got some other ear tips from previously purchased IEMs. Just find out what works best for your ear, because you can pretty significantly impact the fit and sometimes even the sound by just swapping out the ear tips and finding what works best for you. And what's nice is that Dunu includes so many ear tips in the box that, well, you've got quite a selection to pick from here. They do include a set of foams. It's just one set of foams, and I would say the size on these is kind of like a medium. So if you're looking for a large foam, they don't include that, but they do have like an interesting little wax guard on them. I don't know. I haven't actually seen, I don't remember seeing those from Dunu before. But apart from that, you get 4 different sets of, no, 5 different, wait, hold on. 4 different sets, I can count, of silicone ear tips. You get kind of the standard red core. Like, this is the type of tip you would see packaged with a lot of IEMs. They also include a full set of their candy ear tips, which generally these are some of my favorite packed in ear tips that come with IEMs. They've got a nice gumminess to them. They're a little bit on the short side, and for me that ends up working quite well with a lot of different IEMs. They also come stock with these white ear tips on there, which are, you know, kind of similar to their gray silicone ear tips that they often include. These are a little bit softer, a little bit less plasticky than those ones are. So that's nice, and they have kind of like a bulbous rounded shape. You can see that. And then of course they are including their Dunu Linis, or the Dunu SNS tips. A lot of people really like these ear tips. In fact, as you can see, they come in like a nice clear colorway, which they don't always. A lot of people really like these tips. I personally have never really found them to work that well for me. These were the stock tips. They fit pretty decently, but I actually found that what I wanted when I wore this IM, and we'll talk about the fit and stuff in a little bit, was I actually wanted a longer ear tip. And none of these are necessarily that. So while it's fantastic to have all these ear tips, for me, they actually didn't end up working out. So I'll put those to the side. But again, shout out to Dunu for including all that stuff. Apart from that, all right, here's some random accessories we'll talk about. You get a cleaning tool. Okay, that's nice to include. You get a shirt clip. I don't know. I've frankly never used one of these, but if you want to clip the cable to your shirt, I suppose you can do that. They've got a 3.5 to 6.3 millimeter adapter, as well as they include a 4.4 millimeter adapter. I mean, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the interconnects here on these cables are swappable. So while I've got a standard 3.5 mil single-ended connection here, you can easily unscrew this and put this back on there and have a 4.4 mil balance cable, which is nice if you're into that, you sicko. Anyway, they include a little cable tie. They've even got this little pouch for holding your individual earpieces. They've got, frankly, the best microfiber in the business, and I'm kind of being facetious, but also legitimately, I like these microfibers a lot. So it's a nice microfiber towel. And then they include this carry case, which is frankly just too big. I don't really, like, here's what the IMs look like inside of it. Like, they're kind of swimming inside of it. And I guess it's kind of, I don't know. What do you think? I'm curious what you think. Personally, this is just much larger than anything I would ever use. It's nicely made. Like, it's, you know, it's got some protection to it. It's got a magnetic clasp on it, which I like. I like magnets. I'm a big fan. There's even a little, you know, a little sleeve in there for you to store ear tips and stuff like that. But I don't know. It looks nice, but frankly, not something I would ever use. But with that out of the way, let us focus on the IM. We'll talk about the build quality of this thing, starting with the cable. And this is frankly a fantastic cable. Dunu, you know, again, they're getting pretty well known for their cables. And I really like the cables that they've been including with their most recent IMs, including like the Dunu Titan S2, as well as the Dunu Kima 2, which I haven't reviewed yet, but that will be coming soon. And this is very similar to that. So it's like got a nylon braid around the bottom of the cable, which just ends up behaving quite nicely. It's maybe a little bit on the stiff side. You can see that it can stand itself up if you bend it the wrong way. But generally I found that the behavior on this cable is quite nice. Down below the Y-split, and then at the Y-split, it forks into a silicone sort of sheathing here. And the benefit of this is that you get kind of the niceness of the nylon wrap down below, but sometimes this kind of a wrap can be a little bit microphonic, which just means that like as this rubs against your shirt, sometimes that noise can get transmitted into your ear. But by forking over into the silicone wrapped ends up at the top, you avoid that problem pretty much entirely. So it's a nice little balance. And while the aforementioned Kima 2 and Dunu Titan S2 came with a similar cable with a similar approach where they were silicone up top, this is just a little bit softer, a little bit more pliable, and the behavior on it is accordingly a little bit nicer. So yeah, I guess let me give you a little roadie wrap to kind of demonstrate what this thing looks like when it is wrapped up and how nice and tight and tidy it wraps. Like, I dig this a lot. So yeah, big fan of this cable. Now, one thing to note, I guess I'll punch it on this. It does terminate with, it's got preformed ear hooks, and this one is terminating into MMCX, okay? And I know some people are, well, people have preferences, like MMCX versus 2-pin. I don't have a big preference, except that the only thing I don't really like about MMCX is that a lot of times it swivels, right? And sometimes it's just too loose. They actually do a good job with this one, however, being nice and stiff. I don't have any issues with this thing rotating unwantedly. So there's rotation there if you want it to adjust the fit, but it's going to hold its place, and it's not going to be something you need to deal with every time you put it on your ears, which for me is frankly important. But one thing that's notable, and actually I'm not totally sure about this yet, but Hi-Fi Go has a listing for the Dunu, the Brain Dance. Sorry, I almost went through with the full name. They've got a listing for the Brain Dance that actually lets you select between MMCX and 2-pin. I don't see that on Dunu's official website yet, but this is a brand new item. It's not even shipping yet, so I don't know. Maybe that's something to look for. Maybe you can decide if you want MMCX or 2-pin. And that frankly wouldn't be too surprising given Dunu recently released the Glacier with the 2-pin alternative, because I guess some people are asking for it. All right. Apart from that, all right, we're not done talking about this cable. I'm sorry if you're tired of hearing me talk about it, but I did want to quickly demonstrate the mechanism here. So this is their Q-Lock mini system, where you just unscrew this, you pull that out, you take this balance connector. Let's make sure we align that correctly so I don't break the pins. All right. I don't know that I've done it. There we go. Screw that on, and now I've got a balance cable. And what I really like about this system is that it isn't bulky. Like, this is not really any larger than your typical 3.5 mil or 4.4 mil connector, and you get the flexibility of having it be swappable. So I really like the way that Dunu is doing this. In fact, they've got an original version called the Q-Lock. This is the mini version, which they've been putting on their lower end sets. I actually think this is better than the higher end Q-Lock. It's just more compact, and it's not a right angle. So I guess some people like the right angle. Personally, I like the straight jacks. But anyway, that will lead us into talking about these earpieces. And this is where I mentioned when I initially saw this IM, I was not that interested in it. Because this aesthetic is pretty opinionated. It's pretty interesting. I thought that to be honest, I thought this was going to be like kind of like a budget cheap set. It looks a little bit toy-like, and I thought that it was going to be like a plastic shell, and that's why I was kind of just not that interested in it. But turns out this is not a budget set. This is a $500 set. It's a premium set, and the shells are, in fact, nice and metal. I don't know if you can hear that clinking, but they clink because they metal. And I don't know, there's something, maybe it's just because I heard it and I really like the way it sounds, that I'm coming around to the look on this IM. But I think in combination with this cable and just seeing it in person and seeing that it is like a nice high quality metal shell, I'm turned around. Like my original impressions of not being into this IM because of the way it looks, I was wrong. I think this thing looks cool now. It's still, I don't know. I feel like Dunu has done more kind of timeless designs. This does feel a little bit of the time, and maybe this is something that will age a little bit over time. Whereas something like the Glacier, right? That's a beautiful product that I feel like in 10 years is going to look as beautiful. This is going to look maybe a little bit dated, but for the time being, and well, I guess given I've gotten over it, I think it looks fine. What do you all think? I know so the term brain dance, and this is not a reference I really get because I haven't played this game, and the design aesthetic is apparently an homage to the game Cyberpunk 2077, I think. Is that right? Some gamers let me know. But anyway, so that's where kind of the aesthetic and that brain dance terminology come from, is inspiration from Cyberpunk. I don't think it's an officially licensed thing or anything like that. But obviously they have been inspired, and maybe if I had played that game, I would be a little bit more immediately into this look. But as it is, I am a convert. But I don't know. What do you think? Anyway, I think that is all I need to talk about the physical form factor on this IM. Hold on, let me pull up my notes just to make double sure. But pretty sure we can talk about the sound quality on the Dunu brain dance. And let's move this stuff to the side. And as we have been, we're going to dive to the frequency response, which we've got here up on the screen. If you want to take a look at this for yourself, I've got this up on Squiglink, link in the description down below. But yeah, this is the frequency response of the Dunu DK3001BD as promised. And let's analyze it. So there's a couple things here that stand out to me, okay? There's actually three main features of this that really stand out to me looking at it on the graph. One is the bass boost, right? It's got a pretty sizable bass boost, but it is primarily in the sub bass, right? So if you're looking for a meaty, rich, thick kind of bass, that's not the kind of bass you're going to get here with the brain dance, but you are going to get an elevated bass response. It's just going to be mostly in the sub bass. The other feature, and this kind of coincides with that bass boost, is the slight dip in the lower mid-range, which gives it like a contrast to that bass. So you get a lot of that bass without any sort of bleed into the mid-range, but it does come at the expense of making it sound a little bit thin and a little bit clinical in the mid-range. So if you're looking for that, again, that kind of thick, warm, guttural vocals, I guess, That's not exactly what the Braindance is tuned for. And then the last thing that I'll mention, the last feature that really stands out as I look at this graph is this up here, where there's a little bit of an excessive lower treble, or we call it the presence region. So here's where commonly you get a lot of like transient bite, right? So think of like guitar strums, even like drum thwacks and stuff like that. They can get kind of like their initial transient hit from this range, and by elevating it, you can just add a little bit of extra spice or a little bit of extra definition on that thing. And as well with vocals, actually. Vocals can get a little bit of an edginess by having too much here. We'll get into my subjective taste there, but I actually don't find this to be as maybe fatiguing or aggressive as I would expect by looking at it on the graph. Now, another thing I wanted to mention before we leave the graph is just that there's some features here that I feel like I've seen in a number of IEMs this year. I don't know, this feels like the trend of 2020-24 maybe, but it's, you know, having a clean, neutral sound signature with a bass boost, and having, you know, the pit gain kind of go up and down, but then giving us a little bit of excess treble here. Like the IEMs that I'm thinking of right now, the Dunu Glacier does a little bit of this. The Thea Audio Oracle Mark III does a little bit of this. The AFU Performer 5+2, which I just reviewed, does a little bit of this. Even like the Meze Alba, frankly, does a little bit of this. So like, if you've heard those IEMs sound signature wise, you probably have a decent idea of what to expect with the Braindance. But of course, the human subjective listening impression comes into play as well. And I guess that's where I'm gonna transition into just my subjective impressions of listening to the Braindance. And generally, this thing is just technically phenomenal, okay? And that was what impressed me immediately when I heard this thing at CanJam. It has really wide sense of imaging, really clean delineation between sounds. Everything sounds super well separated, and also still really, really smooth. Whereas some of those other IEMs I just described, they have sound signatures that are kind of a similar philosophy. Those ones all have some issues with the treble for me. This one, I have no issues with the treble. I mean, fair warning, it is a little bit on the spicy side. Some people might have an issue with the treble. It's not exactly a safe treble tuning, but the execution is, I find, just phenomenal. All right, what do I want to say? It's both forward and super smooth. Frankly, the treble performance on this, it reminds me, actually, again, kind of calling back to a previous review. I reviewed the Elysian Pilgrim earlier this year, and I mentioned that when I heard that at CanJam, that was a little bit on the spicy side, and when I heard it in the retail version, it seemed like they had tamed it down. And that, for me, was a downside. This guy kind of gives me similar treble vibes to the version of the Pilgrim that I heard at CanJam. And that is part of what just makes this like really, really alluring to me. It's just a super engaging. Again, it's very smooth, but it's not the safest treble tuning. It really does a fantastic job of adding that transient bite, adding that definition, and there's just something like transparent about the way that this thing sounds that I find just super addicting. Unlike the Pilgrim that I heard at CanJam, the bass on this thing is fantastic, okay? The bass on the Pilgrim was fine, but the bass on this guy is really just fantastic. Maybe it doesn't have quite the same body and physicality as something like the Moondrop Dusk, but it's pretty close, and what it has instead is just like this, again, really clean delineation, and a nice bounce to it. It's pretty satisfying, and it gives a really good sense of depth. So while you have that wide imaging from kind of the excessive treble, you also get that really good sense of depth and realism from that bass that just overall makes the Braindance a really, really satisfying IEM to listen to. All right, anything else I want to talk about with mine in the notes? I mean, I guess I'll note on that bass, it is, as I mentioned up top, not a mid-bassy set. So if you're used to listening to like a lot of classic rock that has a lot of kick drums and stuff in it, that might not come across with the same authority that you would expect of another IEM, I suppose, another IEM that has more of that mid-bass presence. But I really never found this thing to be lacking in that regard. Like, I listened to the Parcels live album as an example, or even like not Cigarettes After Sex, The Cure, the Disintegration album. Like that's an album that has a lot of like, I'm thinking of the track Close Down. it's got a lot of like this drums and percussion kind of dancing around my head. And that's a set that can, or that's a song that can sound really flat on sets that are just purely sub bass focused, because there's not a lot of sub bass in that track. But this set does it fantastic. Okay, so I really don't find it lacking. But just know, if you're looking for that mid bass meat, depending on your music, and I can't hear all your music, but depending on your music, you might find that to be an issue. Other weaknesses is, again, it's not the safest of treble executions, and I guess also, maybe a personal note, I found that this set didn't work as well for me listening at quiet volume. So I do a lot of my listening actually in bed while I'm getting ready to sleep, or actually while I'm sleeping. And usually in that scenario, I'm listening at even quieter listening levels than I normally listen to. Normally I listen around, let's say 75 dB. When I'm sleeping, it's quieter than that. I don't know exactly how quiet, but at those listening levels, some of the technical engagement of this set gets lost a little bit. And what you're left with is the tonality, which sounds more or less natural, just a little bit on the thin side, a little bit bright. And it was still good, but it wasn't quite as engaging as it is when listened to at my normal listening volumes. Okay, anything else to talk about? I don't think so. So let me bring in a couple of other IMs for direct comparisons. So what we have over here is the High Senior Megafest, the Mega 5 EST. This is a Tribrid IM, came out I think last year, but I reviewed this one earlier this year. And then over here, we've got the Moondrop Cross Critical Dusk, which is, I guess, technically also a Tribrid IM. It's got two dynamic drivers, a handful of balanced armatures, and a microplanar, kind of like this, but I think it's only got one. I don't know. I didn't actually count them. But anyway, these are all pretty similar. In price range, the Braindance is $500. The Megafest, I think, is $550. And the Dusk is the cheapest on the table at like $360. But all right, let's get into the direct comparisons. Let me just start here with the Megafest. All right, we don't have quite enough room to put them both on. Deal with this. All right, anyway, the Megafest is tonally quite different from the Braindance, right? You've probably heard this term, the new meta. The Megafest is very much in line with the new meta, which means where the Braindance can be a little bit clinical, a little bit thin in the mid-range, and a little bit bright in the lower treble, the Megafest is just like, it's rich neutral. It's got a thicker lower mid-range. It's got less aggressive treble. It actually might be overall the bassier set to some degree. I guess it depends on how you count your bass, how you're calculating your bass. Although overall, I think that the bass performance on the Braindance to me is just much better. It's more delineated, it's more satisfying, and it's more fun. Whereas here, it can be a little bit on the droning side, depending on what you're listening to. For me, I'm thinking specifically Cigarettes After Sex. They have a lot of like, to be fair, the mix has kind of like this droning bass guitar in a lot of their music. And on a set like the Megafest, it can just come across a little bit too droning, a little bit overbearing. Whereas on this, it just comes across as snappy and depth and deep, and like just, I love it on this set, to be honest. Whereas over here, it's okay. What else I want to say? I mean, just in terms of like imaging and technical performance, I think the Braindance just frankly blows away the Megafest. The Megafest is like fantastic for vocal content, right? If you just want nice richness in your vocals, you want kind of all that micro texture and stuff like that, and you want that to be front and center, the tuning on the Megafest is really fantastic and hard to beat. If it had less bass, I'd be able to enjoy that even more often. Whereas this guy goes for just the more clinical, kind of transparent sound signature that could be a little bit more aggressive, less natural, but the way that they've done it here, I don't mind it. I love this. And again, you just get much wider sense of separation between sounds. The left to right stereo imaging is just super wide presenting on this thing. You get a nice sense of depth, whereas here on the Megafest, I found it to sound a little bit condensed and congested, which not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're looking for that kind of engagement factor, something like the Braindance is just going to be way more engaging. Maybe too much, depending on your preferences, however. But that will bring us over here to the Moondrop Dusk. And in some ways, this one kind of sits in between the Megafest and the Braindance, okay? I would say that versus the Braindance, the Megafest is a more mid-rangey tune. If you look at them on a frequency response graph, there's actually a lot of similarities, but Where there is difference, this one just has a little bit more mid-range presence and a little bit less of that lower treble bite, which in combination with the slightly boosted mid-range presence just makes the sound more mid-rangey overall. In fact, I wouldn't describe this as necessarily a warm tuned IM, but in contrast to the Braindance, the Dusk does actually come across with a little bit of warmth to the mid-range. All right, in terms of bass performance, bass levels are very, very similar. Again, this is what you'll see in the frequency response graph, is that they graph very similar in the bass. And I would say that the bass performance is similar, but there are some distinctions. I would say that the Dusk, to my ear, comes across as more impactful, more physical, a little bit more visceral in the bass, whereas the Braindance's bass comes across a little bit bouncier, a little bit more clearly delineated, a little bit more separated, but also maybe a little bit less coherent. If you follow my terminology. So between the two, like honestly, I'm having a really hard time deciding which of these two I enjoy more. They have very similar tonalities, but also just like very different strengths. I think that the Braindance does the better job still with that stereo width. The Dusk is no slouch in that regard, but the Braindance really is just kind of on a next level with that. And then I would say that the treble is actually, while more forward on the Braindance, maybe a little bit smoother and sort of its timbral characteristics. Yeah, I don't know. The Dusk is overall the more balanced tune. I think this works more for more of my music more of the time. But when I'm like in the mood for what the Braindance does, this thing, frankly, is just kind of hard to beat. But I think that will lead us into the conclusion of my review here of the Moondrop DK3001 Braindance Edition. Out of 5 stars, this should not be a surprise. This to me is a 5-star IM. This is only my second 5-star IM of the year, the Dusk being the first. And yeah, I don't know, it was love at first listen. You know, I almost kind of missed out on enjoying this IM because I didn't love the way it looked, and that was my mistake. I now like the way it looks. I love the way it sounds. And yeah, if you want to check it out for yourself, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and stick around for a fit test, because I just realized now I forgot to do the fit test. But we gotta wrap up this review, and I'll do the fit test after the break. Cheers.
Joined with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the pitch. Yeah, I'm up for feeling rich. Need to sit on the This review is super.
I promise we'd be back. Talk about the fit. I apologize that I missed that. But anyway, real quickly, here's how this thing fits. And I will say, this is probably not the strength of the Braindance. It's not bad, but the shells are, let me punch on these quickly, a little bit on the bulbous side, as you can see. And they're packing a lot of drivers in there, so maybe that explains it. But they're a little bit on the bulbous side. You can see that shape-wise, it's not like super semi-custom molded. And because of that, that was why I personally went with a longer fitting ear tip. This for me is a SpinFit CP100. Will that work for you? I don't know, but it worked for me. And I guess I'll show you what it looks like in my ear as I talk about that. So pop this in, we'll zoom in for you, and you can take a look. Size-wise, I would say it's kind of like a medium large-ish. It does feel a little bit large in the ear, and partly I think that's because of that bulbousness of the fit. But you can also kind of see that it is pushing forward on this part of my ear. But once I have this in place with these ear tips, I find the comfort to be fine, not outstanding, but it's fine. And the fit stability to be pretty good. And this is one that I've slept with a number of nights. I mentioned listening to this thing at quiet volumes while sleeping. I've slept with this thing a number of nights and have always woken up with it still in my ear. So shout out to Dunu in that regard. But there you go. There is your fit demonstration of the Dunu. Yeah, I guess I got to figure out a way to sign this out for a second time. But I don't know. Share this video with a friend.